Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
Hongkongers around the world are hesitant to return to their hometown due to Beijing's crackdowns. But there's some good news for those who are already in the U.S. They can stay longer. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
President Biden on Thursday offered temporary safe haven to Hong Kong residents in the U.S. This allows thousands of people to extend their stay for up to 1.5 years. In a memo, Biden said over the last year, the People's Republic of China has continued its assault on Hong Kong's autonomy, undermining its remaining democratic processes and institutions, imposing limits on academic freedom, and cracking down on freedom of the press. Biden added offering safe haven for Hong Kong residents who have been deprived of their guaranteed freedoms in Hong Kong furthers the United States' interests in the region. The United States will not waver in our support of the people in Hong Kong. A senior administration official pointed out the vast majority of Hong Kong residents currently in the U.S. are eligible for the program. Hong Kong is a former British colony and returned to Beijing's control in 1997. Back then, Beijing promised not to change the city's economic and political systems for 50 years, until 2047.
And Illinois officials will not be criminally charging a police officer for accidentally shooting a teenager. They found that the officer's actions were justified. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
It was an awful accident. In 2019, teenager Rylan Wilder was caught in Des Plaines police officer Jimmy Armstrong's line of fire. He was shot once in the arm. Fortunately, it wasn't fatal. The officer entered this music studio in pursuit of Christopher Willis, who ran into the building after robbing a bank, hijacking a car, and shooting an officer in the head. Willis was shot multiple times and died later that night. Cook County State Attorney Kim Fox refused to charge Armstrong, saying there isn't enough evidence for criminal charges. Their report says the officer acted reasonably in using deadly force against the robber. It went on to say there is no evidence to suggest that Officer Armstrong intended to shoot the teenager. But a lawyer for the Wilder family told a local Chicago station they're now suing the police department. Their lawyer called the shooting reckless, implying that Armstrong could have used a handgun instead of the AR-15, which dealt a lot of damage to Wilder's arm. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
And as the number of illegal border crossings surges to the highest level in 2 decades, smugglers are making a huge profit. A senior Homeland Security official recently told Congress that cartels and others involved in related criminal activities can earn up to $6 billion per year.
Cartels and other smugglers are making huge profits on illegal border crossings. John Condon, the acting assistant director of ICE's Homeland Security Investigations, told Congress last week U.S.-bound human smuggling and related criminal activities are estimated by the Homeland Security Operational Analysis Center to produce revenues of between $2 billion to $6 billion per year. Smuggling humans is less risky than smuggling drugs, as border crossers need to pay a large amount of money up front. According to the Washington Times data, people from Central American countries pay anywhere between $4,500 to $30,000 to enter the U.S., with the typical rate between $9,000 and $10,000. Mexicans are paying between $3,600 and $18,000, with a typical rate of $8,000 to $9,000. That doesn't include other costs along the way or a final release fee that smugglers charge, which can add on thousands of dollars. Analysts estimate that at least 3/4 of illegal immigrants opt to pay a smuggling organization for the journey. Experts say 2021 will be a record-breaking year for the smugglers.
California's recall election is around the corner, and candidates are eager to win the governor's seat. NTD spoke to some candidates after yesterday's live debate to get their thoughts on what they would do for Californians. Here's NTD's John Fredericks with more.
As California's governor recall election draws closer, 4 hopeful candidates participated in the debate at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. Hosted by Fox News, the recall debate allowed candidates to share what changes they would bring to California.
Well, the first thing I do is I'd end the state of emergency. It is an absurdity that this is still in effect here in California. Even Andrew Cuomo in New York has terminated the state of emergency in that state. So California is clinging to this pandemic mentality, and Gavin Newsom is clinging to extraordinary emergency powers when there is absolutely no reason to do so, and it's doing terrible damage to our state.
During the debate, candidates answered questions addressing the pandemic, critical race theory, crime, law enforcement, housing, wildfires, and much more.
I'm going to fire the guys that are standing in the way of water development, and I'm going to fire the guys who are trying to release prisoners from prison by changing the rules under which they get good credit. I'm going to change the people who are on the State Board of Education that I have the right to appoint, and we're going to give parents school choice.
Others spoke about homelessness and house prices.
Well, the first issue that needs to be addressed is housing. And why? Because housing drives up the cost of living. It's why businesses are leaving the state. It's a major factor in homelessness. And it's one of the easiest to attack because government is one of the reasons, the main reason why housing is so expensive in this state.
During the debate, one issue candidates unanimously agreed on was that California needs protection from foreign influence and information theft, specifically from the Chinese Communist Party. The candidates also said they would undo and revise Governor Gavin Newsom's policy on crime, homelessness, and sanctuary cities. As September 14th voting day gets closer, candidates will continue to speak out on why they should be California's next governor. This is John Fredericks, NTD News, your Belinda.
Fewer Americans filed new jobless claims last week as the U.S. job market continues to recover. Initial claims for state unemployment benefits fell to 385,000. The number of people continuing to receive benefits dropped to the lowest level since the pandemic began. One economist says from this jobless claims number, together with other data like flights and restaurant bookings, it appears for now the economy is still well on the path of recovery. But others say stimulus from the government and central bank are artificially propping things up. There are also worries around new variants of the virus, and despite today's positive job news, the job market recovery still has a long way to go. The U.S. is still 6.8 million jobs short of where it was in February 2020. The U.S. trade deficit in goods and services rose 6.7% in June, hitting a record high of almost $76 billion. We've never imported more products in a single month, over $280 billion worth, up over 2% since May. By the laws of economics, when your country runs a trade deficit, it's becoming less wealthy. And so far this year, the deficit is over 46% higher than the same period last year. The goods deficit with China, the largest the United States runs with any country, rose 5.8% in June. Some analysts expect the trade deficit to narrow in coming months. They think the U.S. will export more to countries once they recover more. And maybe U.S. demand for foreign goods will wane as stimulus and savings are spent up. Others worry the U.S. economy isn't as competitive as it was in the past due to business regulations and generous social programs that keep people out of the workforce. Beijing's regulatory crackdown on Chinese firms is sending shockwaves through stock markets. American investors are worried about backing Chinese companies, but questions are raised. Why is Beijing doing this to Chinese-owned companies? NTD's Don Ma has more.
Beijing's regulatory crackdowns on major Chinese firms is causing companies to lose hundreds of billions of dollars in stock value. Investors are more wary than ever about investing in Chinese firms. The latest casualty from the crackdown is China's after-school tutoring industry. Beijing laid down a harsh regulation that banned private teaching firms from earning profits and raising capital. Companies were also not permitted to hire foreigners as teachers. The regulation resulted in investor sell-offs that erased more than $1 trillion in value from Chinese equities. Affected companies include major players like ByteDance. The firm had a stake in the education sector, and now it could be laying off hundreds of its employees. Many Chinese firms have been hit by Beijing's recent crackdowns, major companies such as Alibaba, Tencent, DiDi, and others. So why is Beijing doing this to its own Chinese-owned companies? Commentators offer a number of explanations. One told Chinese-owned newspaper South China Morning Post it's because these companies are getting too big, and Beijing is nervous about the tech firm's power. For example, companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon have a huge influence on customer behavior and the economy. On rare occasions, even public policy. They have enormous amounts of data on users, infrastructure, and transportation. This is the case with some major Chinese tech companies as well, and this power may not be necessarily used in line with the regime's goals. Another told South China Morning Post that a reason could also be that Beijing is concerned about Chinese companies' data falling into the hands of foreign countries. This could have been the case with the crackdown on Chinese ride-hailing firm NTD when it tried to go public on the U.S. stock market. NTD has a huge archive of potentially sensitive data. It includes Chinese infrastructure and the real-time locations of large numbers of Chinese citizens. Beijing was likely worried that this data would go to U.S. regulators in the process of NTD going public. Don Ma, NTD News.
A collector of traditional archery equipment is showcasing his large collection of bows and arrows. Most of them come from ancient Asia and India. These weapons of antiquity reveal to us the rich culture and legendary stories behind them.
Sticks and feathers joined to create this beautiful ancient archery. They are part of a personal collection belonging to Jack Farrell, a professional carpenter in Houston, Texas. He explains making and shooting traditional bows and arrows is a lifelong hobby.
6 or 7 years old, I think my father saw me making little bows and arrows out of sticks and things, and so he bought me a wood bow. He bought himself a wood bow, and we shot them for a while, and then my bow broke, and then he lost interest, and so I started using his bow, and I've been shooting a bow ever since then.
Divorced and childless, he sees his collection as children. The simplest among his pieces are known as self-bows. Found in India in the 19th century, this steel bow has Arabic inscriptions inlaid with gold and silver, showing information about its maker. Composed bows are those made of wood, water buffalo horns, and tendon, like this asymmetric Japanese bow and the crab bow, collected in India by the British military. Jack says one of his most interesting items is a broken bow his friend brought from Mongolia. It was first made in Beijing during China's Cultural Revolution.
In the early 1960s, during the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guard went to the Juyan Ho bow shop, and even though his bows are loyal communist bows with red stars on them, that wasn't enough. They took all the produce of the shop, all the water buffalo horns, all the tendon, all the wood, all the old bows, all the old arrows, all the arrow making material. They took everything and made a pile of it out in the street and set fire to it.
Jack also owns arrowheads from different historical periods, but all of them came from one town in Afghanistan. He says archery has helped him understand the philosophy of Asia's nomadic culture.
Archery works on rules of engineering and aerodynamics, and you can understand a good deal of that, but not everything. You just never get to the point where you understand it all. So it's a bottomless thing. It's wonderful.
At one point, the Korean government even invited Farrell to visit and view their extensive bow collections.
And just because you stand 18 feet tall doesn't mean you don't need some support. Scientists now believe giraffes display intricate social behavior. Until now, the tallest land animal was thought to be rather aloof, forming no lasting bonds. New research published in the journal Mammal Review suggests female giraffes form long relationships with one another and even care for each other's young. Female giraffes also continue to live 30% of their lives past their fertile years. That's uncommon in the animal world and is largely seen as an indicator they stick around to ensure the survival of their grandchildren. Male giraffes, on the other hand, appear to be about as aloof as originally thought, only forming bonds with their mothers. Giraffes are listed as vulnerable by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Their numbers have declined by 40% since 1985.
Everything that's reported on television isn't always true. it should be. NTD, the power of truth. Now available 24/7 on television and streaming platforms.